The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Oakbridge Square. It was the kind of day that belonged on a postcard, the kind of day where nothing bad should happen. But Officer Derek Holt wasn't looking for postcards, he was looking for trouble. His patrol car rolled slowly past the iron gates of the historic district, past the perfectly trimmed hedges, past the million-dollar colonials with their pristine white columns. Oakbridge was old money. Old money meant old rules, and the oldest rule of all, the one that Derek Holt had internalized so deeply it had become part of his DNA, was simple. Certain people belonged here, and certain people did not. That's when he saw him. A black man, sitting alone on a wrought iron bench near the center of the town square, wearing a faded grey hoodie, worn jeans, sneakers that had seen better days. He was holding a paper cup of coffee, and he wasn't doing anything, just sitting, just existing, just breathing the same air as the residents of Oakbridge, Virginia. To Derek Holt, that was crime enough. He pulled his cruiser to the curb and killed the engine. His hand moved instinctively to his holster, his thumb hooked over his duty belt in that aggressive posture he'd perfected over 14 years on the force. He studied the man through his tinted windshield, cataloging details with the practiced eye of someone who had already made up his mind. The hoodie was baggy, could be concealing a weapon. The sneakers were scuffed. No legitimate resident of Oakbridge would be caught dead in shoes like that. The man's posture was relaxed, almost unnaturally so, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Derek felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before every confrontation, the anticipation, the power. This was what he lived for. What Officer Derek Holt failed to notice were the details that would have saved a wiser man. He didn't notice the way the man's eyes moved in constant subtle sweeps across the perimeter of the square, the peripheral scanning that only came from years of training in hostile environments. He didn't notice the way the man's hands rested on his knees, loose and relaxed, but positioned to move in any direction within a fraction of a second. He didn't notice the stillness. It was the stillness of a predator that didn't need to roar to prove it was dangerous. And he certainly didn't notice the small outline pressed against the fabric of the hoodie's inside pocket. An outline that if Holt had looked closer, he might have recognized as a leather credential case, the kind that held something far more significant than a driver's license. The man on the bench was waiting for his daughter. In approximately 15 minutes, 12-year-old Amara would walk out of those conservatory doors carrying her violin case, her face bright with the joy of her lesson, ready to tell her father everything she had learned, and Commander Marcus Cole, United States Navy SEALs, would listen to every word. Because that's what fathers did. That's what mattered. But Derek Holt didn't see a father. He saw a target. He stepped out of his cruiser and began walking toward the bench. His boots crunched against the gravel path with deliberate slowness. He wanted the man to see him coming. He wanted him to feel the weight of authority approaching. He wanted him to be afraid. Marcus Cole heard the footsteps before he saw the officer. He had spent 20 years training his senses to detect threats in environments where a missed sound meant death. The rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel, the slight jangle of equipment on a duty belt, the subtle shift in the ambient noise as someone approached with purpose rather than leisure. He didn't turn around. Not yet. He took another sip of his lukewarm coffee and continued watching the conservatory doors. Amara would be out soon. They could get ice cream on the way home. He had promised her 3 weeks ago before his last deployment, and the promise had been eating at him ever since. A father should keep his promises. The boots stopped directly behind him. A shadow fell across the bench, blocking the afternoon sun. Marcus set down his coffee cup. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, and looked up at the officer standing over him. In that moment, looking into Derek Holt's eager, hungry eyes, Marcus Cole understood exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. He had seen that look before. In the eyes of warlords, in the eyes of terrorists, in the eyes of men who had been given the smallest taste of power and had let it rot their souls. The look of someone who wanted to hurt him. Marcus took a breath. He kept his hands visible, and he prepared himself for whatever came next, because Commander Marcus Cole had survived things that would break most men. He had operated in the most dangerous places on Earth. He had stared down enemies who would have cut off his head and broadcast it to the world. He could certainly handle one racist cop in a Virginia suburb, but he also knew with the clarity that came from 2 decades of combat experience that the next few minutes were going to require every ounce of discipline he possessed, because his daughter was about to walk out of those doors, and he would not let her see her father on the ground. To understand what happened next in Oakbridge Square, you first have to understand the man sitting on that bench. You have to understand where he came from, what he survived, and what he fought for, because Marcus Cole wasn't just a man in a hoodie, he was a living testament to what human beings could achieve when they refused to be broken by circumstance. Marcus Elijah Cole was born 42 years ago in the Sandtown, Winchester neighborhood of West Baltimore. If you've never heard of Sandtown, Winchester, consider yourself fortunate. It was the kind of place where the life expectancy was lower than some third world countries, where the unemployment rate hovered around 50%, where the sound of gunfire at night was as common as crickets in the suburbs, where children learned to navigate drug corners before they learned to read. Marcus's mother, Dorothy Cole, worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. She cleaned offices downtown from 5 in the morning to noon. She worked the register at a grocery store from 1 in the afternoon to 6. And 3 nights a week she took the bus to a nursing home where she changed bedpans and held the hands of dying strangers until midnight. Marcus would later calculate that his mother averaged 4 hours of sleep a night for 15 years straight. She did this without complaint. She did this because she loved him. She did this because she believed with every fiber of her being that her son was destined for something greater. "You're going to get out of here, baby," she would tell him. Her hands rough from cleaning products, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but burning with conviction. "You're going to be somebody. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different." Marcus never forgot those words. Even when he was 14 and the drug dealers on the corner offered him more money in a day than his mother made in a month. Even when he was 16 and his best friend was shot dead over a pair of sneakers. Even when he was 17 and a guidance counselor told him with casual cruelty that college probably wasn't in the cards for someone from his background. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different. At 18, Marcus walked into a Navy recruiting office with nothing but his mother's words and a determination that bordered on obsession. The recruiter looked at this skinny kid from Baltimore and probably saw just another body to fill a quota. He didn't see the fire burning behind those dark eyes. He didn't see the thousands of hours Marcus had spent training his body and mind in a concrete courtyard while other kids got high. He didn't see the steel in his spine. Boot camp was supposed to break him. It didn't. Advanced training was supposed to weed him out. It didn't. Bud/S, the legendary 6-month crucible that transformed ordinary sailors into Navy SEALs, was supposed to crush his spirit and send him packing like it did to 80% of the candidates who attempted it. It didn't. Marcus Cole rang no bell. He quit nothing. When the instructors told him he couldn't do something, he did it twice. When his body screamed for him to stop, he kept going. When the cold Pacific waters tried to drown him during Hell Week, he floated on his back and looked up at the stars and thought about his mother working 3 jobs so he could have this chance. He graduated Bud/S at the top of his class. He was assigned to SEAL Team 4, then SEAL Team 6, the most elite special operations unit in the United States military. Over the next 2 decades, he would conduct over 300 missions in environments that the American public would never know about. He would earn 3 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and a Purple Heart. He would hunt the most dangerous terrorists on the planet in locations that didn't appear on any official map. He would save lives. He would take lives. He would see things that would haunt him until his dying breath. But through all of it, through the blood and the sand and the darkness, Marcus Cole held on to one truth. He was not defined by the violence he was capable of. He was defined by his capacity for love. And nothing had tested that truth more than the birth of his daughter. Marcus met Vanessa Williams during a rare period of stateside duty when he was 30 years old. She was a pediatric nurse at Norfolk General. A woman whose smile could light up a room and whose stubborn streak matched his own. They married 6 months after their first date, because when you spent your life surrounded by death, you learned not to waste time on things that mattered. They tried for 3 years to have a child, 3 years of hope and disappointment, 3 years of treatments and prayers, and then finally, miraculously, Vanessa was pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult. Vanessa was confined to bed rest for the final trimester. Marcus took emergency leave and spent every waking moment by her side, reading to her belly, singing off-key lullabies that made Vanessa laugh, promising their unborn child that he would always be there. He was not there when it happened. He was on a mission in a country he still couldn't name when he received the message that changed everything. Vanessa had gone into early labor. There were complications. The doctors did everything they could. Amara Cole was born healthy, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, perfect lungs that announced her arrival to the world with a cry that nurses would later describe as commanding. Vanessa Cole died 16 hours later. A blood clot, a tragedy that medicine couldn't prevent. Marcus made it home in time to hold his wife's hand as she slipped away. She was too weak to speak, but her eyes said everything. Take care of our baby. Love her enough for both of us. Don't let the darkness win. Marcus kept his promise. He restructured his career around single fatherhood, transitioning from active field operations to a training and advisory role that allowed him to be present for Amara's childhood. He learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos. He learned to cook meals that didn't come from a box. He learned to help with homework and attend dance recitals and have conversations about feelings that no SEAL training could have prepared him for. And when Amara showed an aptitude for music, when her elementary school teacher called Marcus and said his daughter had a gift, Marcus moved heaven and earth to nurture it. He found the best violin teacher in Virginia. He applied for every scholarship available, and when the Oakbridge Conservatory of Music offered Amara a full scholarship based on her exceptional talent, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He left the chaos of Norfolk and moved to this quiet, wealthy suburb where his daughter could focus on her music, where she could walk to her lessons on safe streets, where she could grow up in peace. He knew, of course, that he didn't fit in here. He saw the way neighbors looked at him when he jogged through the historic district in the early morning. He noticed the slight hesitation when he introduced himself at school events. He understood with the clarity of someone who had spent his life navigating hostile environments that Oakbridge tolerated him because of his daughter's talent and his military record, not because they truly accepted him. But Marcus Cole had faced far worse than suburban prejudice. He had faced death itself. He had walked through fire and emerged on the other side. He could handle a few suspicious looks, or so he thought, because sitting on that bench in the afternoon sun waiting for his daughter, watching a police officer approach with hatred in his eyes, Marcus Cole was about to discover that some battles couldn't be won with superior training or physical strength. Some battles required a different kind of courage altogether. On the opposite side of the equation stood Derek William Holt. And to understand his role in what was about to happen, you have to understand the void at the center of his existence. Derek Holt was 38 years old, 14 years on the Oakbridge police force, and the owner of a personnel file that should have ended his career at least 6 times over, 14 excessive force complaints, 8 internal investigations, 3 civil settlements quietly paid by the city's insurance carrier to make lawsuits disappear, all of it buried, all of it forgotten, all of it enabled by a department that valued loyalty over accountability. He hadn't always been this way, or maybe he had, and it just took time for the rot to become visible. Derek grew up in a working-class family in the shadow of Oakbridge's wealth. His father was a mechanic who came home every night with grease under his fingernails and complaints about the rich people whose cars he fixed. His mother was a secretary who dreamed of living on the other side of the tracks and resented her husband for never getting them there. Between them, they created a son who inherited his father's resentment and his mother's ambition. A toxic combination that curdled into something ugly. He joined the Oakbridge Police Department because it offered him something he'd never had: power. The badge was a skeleton key that opened doors previously closed to him. Suddenly he could walk into the country club where his mother had always wanted membership and be treated with respect. Suddenly the wealthy residents who had looked down on his family for generations were forced to address him as officer. Suddenly he mattered. But power without wisdom is a dangerous thing. And Derek Holt had no wisdom. He started small the way corruption always starts. A little extra aggression during traffic stops in the poorer neighborhoods just outside Oakbridge. A few planted seeds of evidence when he needed an arrest to make his monthly numbers. Minor abuses that no one would report because the victims were the kind of people the system didn't care about. But over time, the small corruptions grew. He started taking money from a drug distributor named Marcus Webb to look the other way when shipments came through the county. He started targeting civilians for petty violations just to feel the rush of dominance. He started seeing his badge not as a symbol of service, but as a license to hunt. His personal life collapsed in direct proportion to his professional descent. His wife Sarah tried to love him through the darkness for 7 years. She tried counseling. She tried patience. She tried everything. But you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. And Derek Holt was too far gone to even recognize he was drowning. She left him 2 years ago, took their son Nathan to her mother's house in Ohio and filed for divorce. The papers arrived on a Tuesday. Derek signed them without reading them, went to work and pulled over 3 cars in minority neighborhoods just to feel something other than emptiness. Nathan, now 15, wouldn't return his calls. The last time they spoke, 6 months ago, his son had said something that still echoed in Derek's mind at 3 in the morning when the silence became too loud. "You're not a cop, Dad. You're a bully, and I don't want to be anything like you." Those words should have been a wake-up call. Instead, they were gasoline on an already raging fire. Derek Holt doubled down on everything that was destroying him. He drank more. He took more money from Marcus Webb. He became more aggressive, more reckless, more hungry for any target that would make him feel powerful again. And now on this golden afternoon in April, he had found the perfect target, a black man, sitting alone, in his town. As Derek approached the bench, his heart rate elevated with anticipation. This was going to be good. This vagrant, this intruder, this person who clearly didn't belong in Oakbridge was going to learn a lesson today. He was going to learn who ran these streets. He was going to learn to fear the badge. Derek Holt had no idea that the man on the bench had hunted terrorists through mountain caves in total darkness. He had no idea that this target had killed more enemies of America than Derek had written parking tickets. He had no idea that he was approaching one of the most elite warriors in the United States military. All Derek saw was skin color and opportunity. It was the last mistake of his career. "Excuse me." The words came out sharp, nasal, dripping with unearned authority. Derek Holt positioned himself directly in front of the bench, blocking the afternoon sun. He wanted this man to have to look up at him. He wanted him to feel small. Marcus opened his eyes slowly. He had heard Holt approaching, of course. He had tracked the officer's footsteps from the moment the cruiser door opened, but he had chosen not to react, not to show any awareness, because men like this fed on fear. They thrived on nervous energy. Denying them that response was the first step in controlling the encounter. "Can I help you, officer?" Marcus asked. His voice was a deep baritone, calm and level as a frozen lake. No tension, no anxiety. Just a man asking a reasonable question. Derek didn't answer immediately. He took a deliberate step closer, invading Marcus's personal space in a way that was designed to provoke. He looked Marcus up and down, letting his gaze linger on the hoodie, the worn sneakers, the dark skin. His lip curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "We've had some calls." Derek said, his eyes hidden behind mirror-tinted Oakleys. "About a suspicious individual loitering in the square, making residents uncomfortable." Marcus didn't blink. He processed the statement with the analytical clarity of someone trained to detect lies in hostile interrogations. First observation, no specific complaint was mentioned because there had been no complaint. This was a pretextual stop. Second observation, the officer's hand was resting near his holster in an aggressive posture that suggested he was hoping for confrontation. Third observation, the officer's body language broadcast hostility so clearly that any first-year SEAL candidate could have read it from 100 yards away. "I'm just waiting for my daughter," Marcus said, gesturing vaguely toward the conservatory across the street. "She's wrapping up a violin lesson." "Is that right?" Derek scoffed. The sound was theatrical, exaggerated. "You don't look like you have a kid in the conservatory. That place is tuition only. Expensive." There it was, the subtext laid bare. "You don't look like you belong here. You don't look like you can afford this. You don't look like us." Marcus felt a familiar coldness settle over him. It was the same coldness that descended before every mission, the mental shift from civilian to warrior. But he wasn't on a mission. He was waiting for his daughter. And the objective here wasn't to neutralize a threat. The objective was to get through this encounter without violence, without escalation, without giving this officer any excuse to take things further. "I'm aware of the tuition," Marcus said dryly. "My daughter has a full scholarship. She's very talented." Derek's jaw tightened. He didn't like being corrected. He didn't like the calm in Marcus's voice. He didn't like anything about this interaction because it wasn't going the way he had planned. The fear wasn't there. The submission wasn't there. Just this stillness, this infuriating stillness that made Derek feel like he was the one being evaluated. "Let me see some ID," Derek demanded, snapping his fingers. "Now!" Marcus didn't flinch. He knew his rights. Virginia was not a stop-and-identify state. He was under no legal obligation to provide identification unless he was being lawfully detained based on reasonable suspicion of a crime, sitting on a public bench while black was not, despite what this officer seemed to believe a criminal offense. "Am I being detained, officer?" Marcus asked softly. Derek's face tightened. The veins in his neck bulged. He hated it when they knew the words. He hated it when they didn't immediately comply. He hated it when they made him work for it. "I said, let me see some ID." Derek repeated, his volume increasing. "Do you have a hearing problem, or are you just stupid?" Marcus felt his own heart rate remain steady at 62 beats per minute. He had been interrogated by Taliban commanders. He had been captured, tortured, and held in a concrete cell for 72 hours during a training exercise designed to simulate the worst conditions possible. A suburban police officer with a chip on his shoulder was not going to rattle him. "I'm asking if I'm being detained," Marcus repeated. His voice dropped an octave, becoming colder. "If I'm not, I'd prefer to sit here and finish my coffee." Derek laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound, completely devoid of humor. "Oh, you're a lawyer now. You think you're smart?" He took another step forward, close enough now that Marcus could smell the coffee on his breath, the faint hint of cigarettes that clung to his uniform, the sour note of a man who was sweating more than the temperature warranted. "Stand up," Derek ordered. "Turn around, hands on the bench." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus remained seated. His hands stayed visible, resting on his knees. He made no sudden movements, but he also made no move to comply. "For what crime?" Marcus asked. And in that moment, watching the rage build behind Derek Holt's mirrored sunglasses, Marcus understood that this encounter had crossed a threshold. The officer had expected submission. He had expected fear. He had expected this to be easy. It wasn't going to be easy. And that was going to make Derek Holt very, very dangerous. Derek Holt felt the heat rising in his chest. It was a physical sensation, a burning that started somewhere near his heart and radiated outward until his whole body felt like it was on fire. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. This vagrant, this intruder, this nobody was supposed to be afraid. He was supposed to stammer and comply and apologize for his existence. That's how this worked. That's how it always worked. "For failing to comply with a lawful order," Derek shouted, his voice loud enough to echo across the square. "And loitering." "Loitering isn't a crime in Virginia," Marcus said, his voice still maddeningly calm. "And you haven't given me a lawful order. You've demanded I produce identification without establishing reasonable suspicion that I've committed any offense. That's not a lawful order. That's harassment." Derek's hand moved closer to his holster. It was an unconscious gesture, a tell that any trained observer would have recognized as a precursor to violence. Marcus noted the movement, catalogued it, adjusted his own readiness posture imperceptibly. "You want to play games with me?" Derek asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You want to play lawyer? Fine. I'll show you what happens to smart guys in my town." He took a step back and unsnapped the retention strap on his holster. It was a deliberate gesture, a threat. The message was clear. "I can hurt you. And I will hurt you." Marcus felt the coldness spread through his entire body. He was entering combat mode. The mental state that had kept him alive through 300 missions in hostile environments. Time seemed to slow. His senses sharpened. He became aware of everything. The position of the sun, the distance to the nearest cover, the weight distribution of the officer's stance, the slight tremor in the hand hovering near the weapon. But he also became aware of something else. Across the street, the conservatory doors remained closed. Amara was still inside. She would be walking out any minute now, and if she walked out to find her father being arrested, being forced to the ground, being treated like a criminal. Marcus made a decision. He would not escalate. He would not use his training to neutralize this threat, even though he could do so in less than 3 seconds. He would absorb whatever came next because his daughter's psychological safety was more important than his own pride. But he would also not submit, because submission would teach Amara the wrong lesson. Submission would tell her that they were less than, that they didn't deserve the same rights as everyone else, that they should accept injustice quietly. Marcus Cole had not spent 20 years fighting for his country just to teach his daughter to accept being treated as a second-class citizen. "Stand up!" Derek repeated, his voice now a growl. "Last warning." Marcus stood up slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible at all times, palms open and facing outward. He rose to his full height, 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and bone and controlled power. For a moment, he simply looked down at the officer, letting the physical reality of their size difference register. Derek took an involuntary half-step backward. His body reacted before his mind could override it, recognizing on some primal level that he was standing in front of something dangerous. But his ego refused to accept what his instincts were telling him. He forced himself to step forward again, to reclaim the space he had yielded. "Turn around," Derek ordered. "Hands on the bench." "No." The word was simple, quiet, absolute. Derek's face turned a mottled shade of red. His hand closed around the grip of his service weapon, though he didn't draw it. Not yet. Some distant, rational part of his brain recognized that drawing on an unarmed man who was cooperating would look bad on body camera footage. But that rational part was being drowned out by rage, by humiliation, by the overwhelming need to reassert his dominance. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no." Marcus's voice remained level, but there was something beneath it now. an undercurrent of steel that made the word feel less like defiance and more like a warning. "Officer, I'm going to give you one chance to walk away and check your patrol logs. You really don't want to do this." Derek stepped forward until he was chest to chest with Marcus. Well, chest to upper abdomen given the height difference. He had to crane his neck upward to make eye contact, a positioning that undermined his attempt at intimidation. "Are you threatening me, boy?" The last word landed like a slap. Boy. Loaded with centuries of history. Loaded with all the degradation and dehumanization that black men in America had endured. Derek didn't even try to disguise it. He used it as a weapon, expecting it to wound, expecting it to provoke. Marcus's eyes narrowed. The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees, but his voice remained calm. "I'm not threatening you, I'm saving you." Derek had been on the force for 12 years. In that time, he had learned that the badge was a shield that protected him from consequences. He had learned that if he yelled loud enough, people shrank. He thrived on the fear in people's eyes, fed on their submission, used their weakness to make himself feel strong. But looking into Marcus Cole's eyes, Derek Holt saw no fear. He saw a boredom that infuriated him. He saw a man who was not intimidated by his badge, his gun, his authority. He saw, though he couldn't have articulated it, the eyes of someone who had faced things far more terrifying than a corrupt cop in a suburban town square. And it made Derek want to destroy him. "Get on the ground." Derek unholstered his taser. The bright yellow plastic gleamed in the afternoon sun as he pointed it squarely at Marcus's chest. His hand was shaking slightly, though whether from rage or fear was impossible to tell. "Get on the ground or I will light you up." The commotion had drawn attention. Across the square, a young woman who had been walking a golden retriever stopped dead in her tracks. A couple sitting at an outdoor bistro across the street turned around in their wrought iron chairs, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. Near the fountain, a teenager pulled out his phone and began recording. The unblinking eyes of the internet were waking up. Marcus remained standing. He did the calculations instantly, the way he had been trained to do. 7 feet of distance. If Derek pulled the trigger, the probes would hit his chest. Marcus had been tased before. During SERE school, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, the training that prepared SEALs for the worst-case scenario of capture by hostile forces, the electric shock hurt like hell, sent every muscle into involuntary contraction, dropped even the strongest men to the ground. But Marcus could fight through it. He had fought through worse. The question was whether he should. He looked past Derek's shoulder to the conservatory doors. Still closed. Amara would be walking out soon. 5 minutes, maybe 10. And if she walked into this scene, if she saw her father writhing on the ground from a taser, surrounded by police cars being treated like a criminal, the psychological damage would be immeasurable. Marcus made his choice. He would not fight. He would not run. He would not give this officer any justification for using force. But he would also not surrender his dignity. He would stand his ground literally and figuratively and let the cameras capture the truth of what was happening. "I am a commissioned officer in the United States Navy," Marcus said, projecting his voice clearly so the gathering bystanders could hear. The teenager with the phone moved closer, still recording. "Good. My identification is in my back right pocket. I'm slowly reaching for it." He began to move his right hand toward his pocket, moving with deliberate slowness, making every motion visible and non-threatening. "Don't you move!" Derek's voice cracked with hysteria. The taser wavered in his grip. His whole body was trembling now, the adrenaline dumping into his system, making him twitchy, unpredictable, dangerous. "You're lying!" Derek continued, spittle flying from his lips. "You're a vagrant. I've seen your type before. Stolen valor. Is that it? You think you can lie to me? You think a cheap trick is going to get you out of this?" Marcus lowered his hands slowly. He kept his palms visible. He maintained eye contact with Derek through the mirrored sunglasses. "Check the ID," Marcus said firmly, "or call your dispatcher and run my name. Marcus Cole, Commander Marcus Cole. I'm asking you to verify before you do something you can't take back." Derek hesitated. For one brief moment, some remnant of rationality flickered in his brain. The growing crowd, the phone's recording, the calm insistence of the man in front of him. Maybe he should call it in. Maybe he should verify. But the thought was drowned out almost immediately by the rage, by the humiliation of being talked back to, by the intolerable knowledge that this black man in a hoodie was not afraid of him. "I'm not checking anything until you're in cuffs," Derek snarled. He holstered the taser and reached for his baton instead. The extendable metal weapon snapped out to its full length with a satisfying click. Derek had used this baton dozens of times. On drunks who didn't move fast enough, on homeless people who didn't clear out when told, on teenagers who talked back. It always worked. "Last warning," Derek said. He was grinning now, a predator's grin. "Get on the ground or I'm going to put you there." Marcus didn't move. Derek swung. It was a sloppy, telegraphed strike aimed at Marcus's knee. A compliant strike, designed to buckle the leg and drop the target to the ground. It would have worked against a drunk. It would have worked against a scared teenager. It would have worked against anyone who didn't have 20 years of close-quarters combat training. To Marcus Cole, the swing appeared to move in slow motion. He didn't strike back. He didn't grab the baton. He simply shifted his weight. A subtle pivot of the hips that any casual observer would have barely noticed. And the baton whistled through empty air where his knee had been a fraction of a second earlier. Derek stumbled forward, pulled off balance by the momentum of his own swing. For a moment he was vulnerable, exposed, his center of gravity compromised. Marcus could have ended him right there. A dozen different responses flashed through his mind. Techniques that would have dropped Derek to the ground in less than a second. Joint locks, pressure points, simple physics applied to the human body. But he didn't. Because his daughter was about to walk out of those doors. Because the cameras were rolling. Because violence, no matter how justified, would only make this worse. "Assault on an officer!" Derek screamed, his face turning purple with rage. He was humiliated. He had missed. He had looked foolish in front of witnesses. And he was going to make this man pay for it. "You are done! You are dead!" He lunged at Marcus, trying to tackle him, trying to bring him down through sheer momentum and body weight. It was like a toddler trying to tackle a redwood tree. Marcus caught Derek by the wrists. His grip was like a steel vice. Absolutely unbreakable. He didn't hurt the officer. He simply immobilized him, holding Derek's arms away from his body, rendering him completely helpless. They stood there for a moment, frozen in tableau. The crowd had grown. Phones were everywhere, recording from every angle. The teenager near the fountain was live streaming, his feed already attracting hundreds of viewers. "Let go of me!" Derek thrashed, kicking out wildly. "Let go!" "Calm down," Marcus commanded. It was the voice of a man used to giving orders that were followed instantly in life-or-death situations. The voice of a commander. "Look around you, Calder. You are making a mistake that will cost you your pension. Stop. Now!" Derek managed to key his shoulder radio with his chin. 1099 officer needs assistance. Town square, large male violently resisting arrest. Send everyone... The words crackled over the dispatch frequency. Somewhere across town, officers began moving toward the square. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Marcus released Derek and stepped back. His hands went up again, palms open and visible. "I haven't hit you," Marcus said, his voice projecting across the silent crowd. "I haven't threatened you. I'm waiting for my daughter, that is all." Derek stood there, panting, humiliated, stripped of his authority in front of dozens of witnesses. He slowly reached for his handcuffs, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "You're going to jail for a long time," Derek said, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "I'm going to bury you under the jail. I'm going to make sure you never see daylight again." Marcus heard the sirens getting closer. He heard the excited murmur of the crowd. He felt the phones recording his every move. And then he heard something else. The creak of heavy wooden doors opening. The sound of young voices, laughing and talking. The conservatory had let out. Marcus turned his head toward the building. A stream of students was pouring out, carrying violin cases and cellos and sheet music. Among them, wearing a bright yellow ribbon in her hair, was a 12-year-old girl with her father's eyes. Amara was looking for him, and when she saw the police lights, the crowd, the officer with handcuffs in his hands, the fear that crossed her face nearly broke Marcus Cole's heart. The Baton strike had been meant to bring Marcus to his knees. Instead, it had done something far worse. It had exposed Derek Holt's incompetence to a growing audience. It had transformed a simple harassment into a spectacle, and it had set into motion a chain of events that would ultimately consume everything Derek had built. But Derek Holt didn't understand any of that in the moment. All he understood was rage. All he felt was the burning humiliation of missing, of being immobilized, of being made to look foolish in front of the cameras. His mind had narrowed to a single point of obsession. This man had to be punished. This man had to suffer. This man had to learn. "You resisted," Derek was saying even as the sirens grew louder. "You assaulted me. I have it on camera." "Your camera captured me avoiding a strike and then restraining you without injury," Marcus said. That's called de-escalation. That's what you were supposed to do. The crowd had grown to perhaps 40 people. Phones were everywhere, glowing rectangles capturing every moment, every word. The teenager who had been live streaming now had over 2,000 viewers, the number climbing by the second. Someone in the comments had already identified the location. Someone else was trying to identify the officer. This wasn't just a local incident anymore. It was becoming national. Derek heard the sirens arrive. 3 patrol cars screeched into the square. Lights flashing. Officers emerging with hands on weapons. For a moment, hope surged in his chest. Backup. Witnesses who would support his version. Brothers in blue who would help him salvage this disaster. Sergeant Rita Vasquez was the first to reach them. She was a 15-year veteran, a composed woman who had seen her share of difficult encounters. She took in the scene with quick professional eyes. The growing crowd, the phones, the size disparity between the two men, the baton on the ground where Derek had dropped it. "What's going on here?" Vasquez asked, her voice carefully neutral. "This individual resisted a lawful order," Derek said immediately. "He assaulted me. I need him in cuffs." "He swung a baton at me while I was standing with my hands visible," Marcus said. "There are approximately 40 witnesses and about a dozen phones recording. I haven't touched him except to prevent him from injuring me." Vasquez looked at Derek, then at Marcus, then at the crowd of civilians with their phones. Her jaw tightened. "Derek," she said quietly, pulling him aside. "What did he do?" "He was loitering, acting suspicious. He refused to show ID." "Derek." Vasquez's voice hardened. "What crime did he commit? What was your probable cause for the stop?" Derek's mouth opened and closed. "I had reports. Suspicious individual. You know how it is." "I know how it is," Vasquez said, and there was no mistaking the disgust in her voice. "I know exactly how it is, and I know that those cameras just recorded whatever actually happened." She turned to Marcus. "Sir, I apologize for this situation. Can I see some identification?" Marcus reached into his back pocket, slowly, keeping his movements visible. He withdrew a leather credential case and handed it to the sergeant. Vasquez opened it. She looked at the contents, and her face went absolutely pale. The credential case contained 2 items. The first was a military ID card bearing Marcus's photograph and the designation Commander Marcus Cole, USN. The second was something else entirely. A brass trident, the special warfare insignia that only Navy SEALs were authorized to wear. "Oh, Jesus Christ!" Vasquez breathed. Derek was watching. What is it?" Vasquez closed the credential case and handed it back to Marcus. Her hand was shaking slightly. "What is it?" Derek repeated louder. Vasquez turned to look at him. In that moment, her expression contained something close to pity. "You just tried to assault a Navy SEAL commander," she said quietly. "And Derek, you need to stop talking. Right now. You need to not say another word until you have legal representation." Derek felt the blood drain from his face. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Navy SEAL, commander. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. This was just some vagrant, some nobody, some... He looked at Marcus with new eyes. The stillness that had infuriated him suddenly seemed different. The calm that had enraged him suddenly seemed dangerous. The size, the bearing, the way the man had avoided the baton strike like it was nothing. "That's..." Derek's voice came out as a croak. "That's impossible. He's lying. It's stolen valor. Check the ID. It's fake." "It's not fake," Vasquez said. "I've seen enough military credentials to know the difference. This is real." "Then run it," Derek was shouting now. "Call it in, verify." "I will." Vasquez keyed her radio. "Dispatch, I need a priority verification on a military credential. Commander Marcus Cole, United States Navy. Run everything you can find." The radio crackled. The crowd was silent, watching. The cameras were still recording, and across the square a 12-year-old girl was fighting through the crowd, her violin case clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face, desperate to reach her father. The next few minutes would be replayed millions of times in the days that followed, on news broadcasts, on social media platforms, in courtrooms and congressional hearings. They would become a defining image of police misconduct, a viral moment that encapsulated everything wrong with a broken system. Derek Holt, even knowing what Vasquez had just told him, made the decision that would destroy his life. He arrested Marcus Cole anyway. Later psychologists would analyze his choice. Some would call it cognitive dissonance. The inability to accept information that contradicted his worldview. Some would call it narcissistic rage. The need to assert dominance even in the face of overwhelming evidence that he was wrong. Some would simply call it racism so deeply embedded that it overrode survival instinct. Whatever the explanation, the result was the same. "I don't care what that ID says," Derek spat. "He resisted. He assaulted me. He goes in the car." Derek listened to me very carefully, and Vasquez said, "If you arrest this man, your career's over. The department will not protect you. The union will not protect you. You are on camera trying to assault an unarmed man who happens to be one of the most decorated special operators in the United States military. Do not do this." Derek's face was purple with rage. His hands were shaking. Every warning sign of a man operating outside rational control was flashing red. "He doesn't get to walk away," Derek said. "Not after embarrassing me. Not after making me look bad. He goes in the car, Rita, or I'll go over your head to the captain." Vasquez looked at the other officers who had arrived. She saw the conflict in their faces. The blue wall of silence, that unspoken code that protected cops who crossed the line, was wavering. But it hadn't broken. Not yet. "Fine," she said finally, but I want it on record that I advised against this. And I want your body camera footage preserved. Every frame." Derek pulled the handcuffs from his belt and approached Marcus. The crowd shifted, phones angling for better shots. The teenager who was live streaming had over 5,000 viewers now. The comments were scrolling so fast they were unreadable. Marcus stood perfectly still. He could have resisted. He could have dropped every officer in that square in under 30 seconds. His training, his reflexes, his experience all screamed at him to act. But his daughter was watching. He had spotted Amara in the crowd, her face a mask of terror, being held back by a concerned bystander. A woman who had witnessed everything, who had placed herself between Amara and the chaos, who was whispering reassurances that neither of them believed. Marcus locked eyes with his daughter, across the crowd, across the chaos. He tried to communicate what words could not. "It's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. This is not how it looks." "Turn around," Derek ordered. "Hands behind your back." Marcus turned around. He placed his hands behind his back. He allowed the cold metal to close around his wrists. The familiar ratcheting sound of handcuffs that he had used himself in dozens of operations. But this time he was the one being restrained. This time he was the one being treated like a criminal. "Marcus Cole," Derek said loud enough for the cameras. "You are under arrest for assault on a police officer and resisting arrest." "No charges will stick," Marcus said quietly. "Every frame of this encounter is recorded. You're ending your own career." Derek shoved him toward the patrol car, hard. An unnecessary use of force captured perfectly on 40 different phones. "We'll see about that," Derek said. As Marcus was pushed into the back seat of the cruiser as the door slammed shut behind him, as Derek climbed into the driver's seat with a triumphant smirk, one voice cut through the chaos. "Daddy!" Amara broke free from the woman's grasp and ran toward the car. Her violin case dropped to the grass. Her tears caught the afternoon light. Her voice, high and desperate, carried across the suddenly silent square. Marcus pressed his face against the window. He mouthed words his daughter couldn't hear. "It's okay. I love you. It's going to be okay." Vasquez intercepted Amara before she could reach the car. The sergeant knelt down, gently but firmly holding the crying girl back. "Your dad is going to be fine," Vasquez said, though her voice carried no conviction. "We're going to sort this out. I promise." Derek put the car in gear. He looked at Amara in the rearview mirror, saw the tears, saw the terror, and felt nothing but satisfaction. Good, he thought. Let her see what happens when you don't show respect. As the patrol car pulled away from the square, leaving behind a traumatized child and a crowd of witnesses, Derek Holt believed he had won. He had no idea that the video was already spreading, that news outlets were picking it up, that a hashtag was forming, gaining momentum, preparing to explode across the internet. He had no idea that in 24 hours his face would be recognized by millions of people across the country, and he had no idea that someone very powerful was about to take a personal interest in what happened to Commander Marcus Cole. The child's scream echoed in Marcus's mind long after the patrol car had left the square. It was a sound he would carry with him for years, a sound that would wake him in the middle of the night. Pulse elevated, reaching for a daughter who wasn't there. In the back seat of the cruiser, Marcus forced himself to breathe. The plastic divider between him and Derek was scratched and yellowed from years of use. The seats were hard, designed for discomfort. The handcuffs bit into his wrists, intentionally over-tightened. None of it mattered. What mattered was Amara. His daughter had just watched her father be arrested. She had seen him in handcuffs, treated like a criminal, shoved into a police car. She had screamed his name, and he had been unable to reach her, unable to comfort her, unable to explain. The psychological damage of this moment would take years to heal, if it ever healed at all. Marcus had seen trauma before. He had seen children in war zones who had watched their parents die. He had held the hands of teammates who would never fully recover from what they had witnessed. He understood with brutal clarity that the next few hours and days would be critical in determining whether this experience defined his daughter's relationship with authority forever. But first he had to survive the next few hours himself. Derek was watching him in the rearview mirror. The officer's eyes were gleaming with vindictive pleasure. He thought he had won. He thought the uniform and the badge and the institutional power of the police department would protect him from consequences. He was wrong. But he didn't know it yet. "You're awfully quiet back there," Derek said. "Not so tough now, are you? Not so smart?" Marcus didn't respond. There was nothing to be gained by engaging. Every word he said could be twisted, taken out of context, used against him. Silence was the only tactical choice. "Your kid was crying pretty hard." Derek continued, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Maybe you should have thought about her before you decided to resist a lawful order. Maybe you should have just shown some respect." Marcus felt the rage building in his chest. It was a physical sensation, a pressure that wanted release. 20 years of training in violence, 20 years of learning exactly how to hurt people, and this man was taunting him about his daughter. He forced the rage down. Deep breaths, focus on what mattered. Amara, getting back to Amara, making this right. "I bet she's going to have nightmares," Derek said. "I bet she's going to wake up screaming, wondering where her daddy is, wondering if he's in a cell somewhere, wondering if she'll ever see him again." Marcus closed his eyes. He thought about the breathing exercises they taught at SERE school. He thought about the mantras he used when the pain became unbearable. He thought about his wife Vanessa looking at him in those final hours, mouthing the words, "Don't let the darkness win." He would not let this man break him. He would not give him the satisfaction. The patrol car pulled into the sally port of the Oakbridge Police Department. The heavy gate rattled shut behind them, sealing out the afternoon light. Derek killed the engine and sat for a moment, savoring his triumph. "Welcome to your new home," he said. "Get comfortable. You're going to be here for a while." He opened the back door and roughly hauled Marcus out. The handcuffs were still too tight. Marcus could feel his fingers starting to go numb. Another small cruelty, another petty abuse of power. The processing area was institutional and depressing. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of industrial cleaner couldn't quite mask the underlying odors of desperation and human misery. A desk sergeant looked up from his computer as Derek marched Marcus toward the booking counter. "What have we got?" the sergeant asked. He was an older man, gray-haired and weary-eyed. His name tag read Miller. "Assault on an officer," Derek announced proudly. "Resisting arrest. This one's a real piece of work. Thinks he's tough." Sergeant Miller looked at Marcus, then at Derek, then back at Marcus. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, concern. It was hard to read. "What's your name, sir?" Miller asked, his tone notably more respectful than Derek's had been. "Commander Marcus Cole, United States Navy." Miller's fingers froze over the keyboard. His face went very still. "Could you repeat that? Commander Marcus Cole, United States Navy, currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare Development Group." Miller typed the name into his system. The screen populated with information, and as he read it, the color drained from his face until he looked like he might faint. "Jesus Christ," Miller whispered. "What?" Derek was growing impatient. "What is it? Just process him so I can—" "Derek!" Miller's voice was barely audible. "Come here, look at this." Derek walked around the counter and looked at the screen. Marcus watched his expression transform in real time. Confusion, denial, dawning horror, and finally pure uncut terror. The screen showed Marcus Cole's service record, the SEAL Trident designation, the classified operations, the Silver Stars, the Bronze Stars, the Purple Heart, the commendations and awards that most officers would never receive in a dozen lifetimes, and at the bottom a note that made Derek's blood run cold. Current status: active duty, commanding officer, Vice Admiral Raymond Price, Naval Special Warfare Command. "A 3-star admiral is his boss," Miller said. a 3-star admiral, and you just arrested him for what exactly? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Get the captain, Miller said. Now get the captain and get the chief on the phone. And Derek, you might want to start thinking about how you're going to explain this to the federal government. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in institutional panic. Captain Morrison arrived within 15 minutes, summoned from a Sunday dinner with his family. He was a tall man with silver hair and a reputation for political savvy. He had navigated the treacherous waters of local politics for 30 years. He had survived scandal and controversy and budget cuts and everything else that could derail a law enforcement career. He had never dealt with anything like this. Tell me again, Morrison said, standing in the small conference room adjacent to the holding cells. Tell me exactly what happened. Derek was sitting at the table, his face pale, his hands shaking. The confidence that had carried him through the arrest was gone, replaced by the dawning recognition of catastrophe. I had reports of a suspicious individual. Derek said for the 4th time. In the town square. I approached to investigate. He was uncooperative, refused to show ID, became hostile. I had to use force to... Stop! Morrison held up a hand. Stop right there. You had reports from whom... dispatch mentioned. I pulled the dispatch logs. Morrison's voice was ice. There were no reports of a suspicious individual in the town square. No calls from residents, no complaints. Nothing. You invented the probable cause, Derek. That's not... I had reason to believe. You had reason to believe. Morrison leaned forward, a black man sitting on a bench. That was your reason, in 2024, with half the country watching for exactly this kind of thing. Your reason for approaching a decorated military commander with your hand on your weapon was that he was black and sitting down. Derek had no response. There was no response that wouldn't make things worse. Show me the body camera footage, Morrison said. Sir, there was a malfunction. Show me the footage. The footage was not flattering, even with the gaps, even with the convenient moments where the camera angle shifted or the audio cut out. The basic narrative was undeniable. A police officer approaching an unarmed man, escalating for no reason, swinging a baton, getting immobilized without injury, and then impossibly making the decision to arrest anyway. You're done, Morrison said quietly when the footage ended. You know that, right? You're completely done. There's no coming back from this. He resisted. Derek tried one last time. The video shows you assaulting him and him defending himself without striking you. That's what defense attorneys call reasonable force. That's what federal prosecutors call deprivation of rights under color of law. And that's what I call the end of your career, your pension, and possibly your freedom. Morrison stood up. He looked at Derek with something approaching pity. Badge and gun, now. You're on administrative leave pending a full investigation. And Derek, if I were you, I would hire a very good lawyer. Because you're going to need one. In the holding cell, Marcus Cole sat on the metal bench with perfect posture, his hands finally released from the cuffs. They had offered him water, which he declined. They had offered him a phone call, which he accepted. He had called his sister, asked her to pick up Amara, assured her that everything would be explained soon. Now he waited. He knew how this would play out. The videos were already spreading. The hashtags were already trending. The machine of public outrage was already spinning up, and this time it would grind Derek Holt to dust. But Marcus wasn't thinking about revenge. He wasn't even thinking about justice. Not really. He was thinking about his daughter, about the fear in her eyes, about the scream that still echoed in his memory. He was thinking about how many other fathers had sat in cells like this one, falsely accused, stripped of their dignity, separated from their children, fathers who didn't have military credentials, fathers who didn't have cameras recording, fathers whose stories would never be told because no one would believe them. Marcus Cole had the resources and the connections to destroy Derek Holt. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. Something had to change. And as the door to the holding area opened, as a flustered Captain Morrison approached, with what looked like an apology in his eyes, Marcus began to formulate a plan. This wasn't just going to be about him, it was going to be about everyone. Captain Morrison stood outside the holding cell, visibly uncomfortable. He was a man used to power, used to being in control of situations. But in this moment, facing Commander Marcus Cole through the bars, he was completely out of his depth. Commander, Morrison said, his voice tight. I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for what happened today. Officer Holt acted without authorization, without cause, and without any justification. You are being released immediately with the full apology of the Oakbridge Police Department." Marcus stood slowly. He looked at the captain for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "What happens to Holt?" "He's been stripped of his badge and gun. He's on administrative leave pending a full investigation. I can promise you that this department will conduct a thorough review of—" "With respect, Captain, I've heard that speech before." Marcus's voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of steel. "Every time something like this happens, there's an investigation. There's a review. There's a thorough examination of policies and procedures. And then nothing changes. The officer gets a slap on the wrist, maybe a transfer, and 6 months later he does the same thing to someone who doesn't have my resources." Morrison had no response. The silence stretched between them. "My daughter was traumatized today," Marcus continued. "She watched her father be arrested for sitting on a bench. She's 12 years old and she's going to carry this memory forever. So no, Captain, an apology is not going to be sufficient." "What would you consider sufficient?" Marcus thought about the question. He thought about all the anger, all the pain, all the generations of injustice that had led to this moment. He thought about his mother working 3 jobs in Baltimore telling him he was going to be somebody. "I don't know yet," Marcus said finally, "but I'll figure it out." An officer appeared at the door, looking nervous. "Captain, there's a situation out front." "What kind of situation?" "There are news vans, 4 of them, and—" The officer swallowed hard. "Sir, there's a military vehicle in the parking lot. Black SUV with government plates. The man who got out has 3 stars on his collar." Morrison's face went white. 3 stars. He repeated faintly. "Yes, sir. He's asking to see Commander Cole. And, sir, he looks extremely unhappy." Vice Admiral Raymond Price had been Marcus Cole's commanding officer for 8 years. He had personally pinned the Trident on Marcus's chest. He had recommended Marcus for 2 of his 3 silver stars. He had sat beside Marcus's hospital bed after the operation in Yemen that had earned him a Purple Heart. And now he was standing in the lobby of the Oakbridge Police Department, surrounded by cameras and reporters, looking like the wrath of God in a Navy service uniform. "Where is my officer?" Price asked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Captain Morrison rushed forward, practically tripping over himself. "Admiral Commander Cole is right this way. He's been released. He's not being charged. It was all a terrible—" "I saw the video," Price interrupted. 4 million people have seen the video. In approximately 2 hours, that number will be 40 million. And when I'm done here, it's going to be 400 million because I'm about to make a statement that every news network in the country is going to carry. Morrison looked like he might actually faint. "Admiral, please, if we could discuss this in private." "We'll discuss it in public," Price said. "Commander Cole." Marcus walked into the lobby. He had retrieved his personal effects, including the credential case that had been taken during processing. His hoodie was wrinkled, his clothes disheveled. But he stood straight and tall, the bearing of a military officer unmistakable. "Sir," Marcus said, "are you injured?" "No, sir." "Is your daughter safe?" "She's with my sister, sir. She's shaken, but she's safe." Price nodded. He looked at the assembled cameras, at the reporters who were furiously scribbling notes, at the officers who were trying very hard to be invisible. "Good," he said, "because we have work to do." Outside on the steps of the Oakbridge Police Department, Vice Admiral Raymond Price gave a statement that would be replayed for years. He described Commander Marcus Cole's service record. He described the encounter in the town square. He announced that the Naval Criminal Investigative Service would be opening a full investigation into Derek Holt's conduct, and then he said something that made national headlines. "Commander Cole is not just a decorated war hero," Price said. "He's the kind of man that makes this country great. He overcame poverty. He overcame prejudice. He dedicated his life to protecting the freedoms that we all enjoy. And today in the country, he has spent 20 years defending he was treated like a criminal for sitting on a bench." Price's voice hardened. "This is not about one bad officer. This is about the kind of country we want to be. And I am personally committed to ensuring that what happened today never happens to Commander Cole or to anyone else ever again." The questions came fast and furious. Price answered some and deflected others, but the message was clear. The United States Navy was not going to let this go quietly. In the crowd, Marcus spotted a familiar face, a tall, impeccably dressed black man with a presence that commanded attention. The man caught Marcus's eye and nodded once. Marcus didn't recognize him, but he would soon, because that man was Benjamin Carter, one of the most famous civil rights attorneys in America. He had represented the families of victims in cases that had changed the national conversation about police brutality. And he had decided, watching the video spread across social media, that Commander Marcus Cole's story was going to be his next cause. The war was just beginning. Derek Holt sat in the basement of his house, surrounded by empty beer cans and the wreckage of his own making. He had been suspended without pay. His badge was gone. His gun was locked up at the station. The union rep had called, sounding nervous, talking about complicated optics and limited resources. In other words, he was on his own. The video was everywhere. He had made the mistake of looking at social media, scrolling through the comments, reading what people were saying about him. Racist pig, power-tripping bully, hope he rots in prison. The words blurred together after a while, becoming a constant background hum of hatred. But Derek Holt was not the kind of man who accepted defeat. He was not the kind of man who looked at overwhelming evidence and adjusted his worldview. He was the kind of man who doubled down, who escalated, who burned everything around him rather than admit he was wrong. He called Gary. Gary Mitchell was a former cop who now worked as a private investigator. He specialized in the kind of work that legitimate agencies wouldn't touch. Dirt digging, witness intimidation, evidence fabrication. He and Derek had known each other for 15 years, had worked together on cases that never appeared in official reports. "I need a favor," Derek said. "I need you to find something on this guy, Marcus Cole. Ex-wives, debts, anything. I know these military guys have skeletons, PTSD, anger issues, something. I need ammunition." Gary was quiet for a moment. "Derek, have you seen the video?" "I've seen it. Because it looks pretty bad. The whole country is talking about this. You might want to lay low, let it blow over." "It's not going to blow over," Derek interrupted. "They're going to try to destroy me. The Navy, the Feds, all of them. The only way I survive this is if I can make him look worse than me. Make him the aggressor. Make him the threat." Gary sighed. "I'll see what I can find. But Derek, this could backfire. Badly. Just do it." 3 days later, Gary called back. "I found something. It's not much, but we can work with it. Cole was involved in a bar fight in Virginia Beach 12 years ago. Charges were dropped, but there's a police report, and he's been seeing a therapist at the VA. PTSD treatment, maybe anger management. We can spin it." Derek felt hope for the first time since his world had collapsed. "That's it. Unstable Navy SEAL snaps at local cop. PTSD-riddled veteran threatens officer's life. We leak it to the right blogs, get a sympathetic news anchor to run with it, and suddenly I'm the victim. I know a guy at the local station, Trey Lang. He's hungry for viral content. I can set up an interview. Do it." The segment aired 2 nights later on the local news. Derek wore a suit that didn't quite fit, looking somber and wounded. He wiped at his eyes on camera, practicing the careful choreography of victimhood. "I didn't want to hurt him," Derek told the interviewer, his voice wavering. He had this look in his eyes, the 1,000-yard stare. "I've seen it before in vets with issues. I thought he was having a flashback. I was trying to contain him for his own safety, and he grabbed me, nearly broke my arm." The segment included an edited clip of the encounter, carefully cut to show only the moment Marcus restrained Derek's wrists. The Baton swing was missing. The racial slur was missing. The unprovoked aggression was missing. "I'm the victim here," Derek concluded, looking directly into the camera. "But because he's got brass on his collar, I'm the one losing my pension. I'm the one being treated like a criminal." The fallout was immediate and brutal. At Oakbridge Middle School, Amara Cole was eating lunch in the cafeteria when a group of older students approached her table. She was still recovering from the trauma of watching her father's arrest, still having nightmares, still flinching at the sight of police cars. "My dad says your dad is a psycho," one boy sneered loud enough for the whole cafeteria to hear. "He says your dad should be in a mental hospital, not the Navy." Amara felt the blood drain from her face. The other students at her table went silent. "That's not true," she said, her voice small. "It's on the news." Another kid chimed in. "He attacked a cop. He's got anger issues. My mom says people like that are dangerous." Amara's eyes filled with tears. She stood up abruptly, leaving her lunch tray, and ran toward the bathroom. She could hear laughter following her down the hallway. In the bathroom, she locked herself in a stall and cried. She thought about the father who had always protected her, who had never raised his voice, who had held her hand through the hardest moments of her life. And she thought about the terrible words she was hearing, the lies that were spreading, the world that seemed determined to tear him down. That night, she called her aunt and asked a question that would haunt Marcus for years. Is Daddy going to prison? Is he going to go away forever? Marcus was on the other side of the world when he learned about the news segment. He was in Djibouti at Camp Lemonnier, overseeing a critical operation that required his attention. He had been awake for nearly 72 hours, running on coffee and adrenaline, trying to compartmentalize his personal crisis so he could focus on his professional responsibilities. Then his sister called. "She won't stop crying," his sister said. "She's been bullied at school. She's asking if you're going to prison. Marcus, you need to come home." Marcus felt something break inside him, the carefully constructed walls that had allowed him to function, to lead, to be the commander his men needed, crumbled in an instant. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he said. Tell her Daddy is coming home. Tell her I'm going to fix this." He hung up and stood in silence for a long moment. Then he went to find Admiral Price. "Sir," Marcus said, "I need emergency leave. My daughter." Price held up a hand. "I know. I've seen the news segment. The countermove was predictable but effective. They're trying to change the narrative." "I don't care about the narrative," Marcus said. "I care about my daughter." "I know you do, and that's why we're going to destroy them." Price pulled out a thick manila folder. "While you've been saving the world, some people have been doing their homework. Commander, meet Benjamin Carter. He's been waiting to talk to you." The Gulfstream G650 touched down at Norfolk Naval Station at 0300 hours local time. Marcus descended the stairs into a Virginia night that felt heavier than the air in Yemen had ever been. The humidity stuck to his skin. The darkness pressed in around him. And somewhere in the city he no longer trusted his daughter was having nightmares. A black government Suburban was waiting on the tarmac. Admiral Price was already inside, along with a man Marcus now recognized from countless news broadcasts. Benjamin Carter, the attorney whose name had become synonymous with justice. "Commander Cole," Carter said as Marcus climbed into the vehicle. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. I've reviewed the footage, the personnel files, and the smear campaign that's currently being run against you. The good news is we have an overwhelming case. The bad news is they're going to fight dirty." Marcus shook the attorney's hand. "They've already started fighting dirty. My daughter is being bullied at school. She's asking if I'm going to prison." Carter's expression hardened. "Then we don't just fight back, we obliterate them." The briefing took place in a secure conference room at Naval Station Norfolk. Spread across the table were documents, photographs, and printouts from social media. The scope of the attack against Marcus's reputation was comprehensive and malicious. "They've leaked a police report from 12 years ago," Carter explained. "A bar fight in Virginia Beach. The charges were dropped because you were defending a fellow SEAL who was being attacked, but they're not mentioning that context. They're framing it as evidence of violent tendencies." Marcus nodded. He remembered that night. A group of drunk civilians had decided to start trouble with men they didn't realize were special operators. The fight had lasted approximately 8 seconds. No one had been seriously hurt. The charges had been dropped within 48 hours. "They've also obtained your VA medical records," Carter continued. "Illegally, I should add. They're claiming you're being treated for PTSD and anger management issues. They're painting you as a ticking time bomb." "PTSD treatment isn't shameful," Marcus said quietly. "Half the men I've served with are dealing with it. We encourage each other to get help." "Of course you do, and we're going to make that point very clearly. But here's the thing, Commander. They've overplayed their hand. The person who leaked your medical records committed a federal crime. The edited video they released can be compared against the unedited versions from civilian phones. And the officer in question, Derek Holt, has a personnel file that reads like a masterclass in police misconduct." Carter slid a document across the table. Marcus read through it, his expression growing darker with each page. 14 excessive force complaints in 6 years. 8 internal investigations, all dismissed or settled quietly. 3 civil lawsuits, all paid out by the city's insurance carrier. A pattern of targeting minorities for petty violations. And buried at the bottom a note from a former partner who had requested a transfer because he was uncomfortable with Officer Holt's approach to suspects. "The town council is holding an emergency hearing tomorrow night," Carter said. "Holt is going to demand a public apology and your immediate discharge from the Navy. He's going to claim self-defense. He's going to cry on camera." Marcus looked up from the document. "What's our play?" Carter smiled. It was the smile of a man who had spent 30 years destroying people who thought they were untouchable. "We let him think he's won. We let him walk into that hearing, say his piece, dig his grave nice and deep, and then we bury him." Admiral Price leaned forward. "NCIS has been doing some digging of their own. The body camera footage that Holt claims malfunctioned. We recovered it from the cloud vendor's backup servers, every frame, Every word. And the bank across the street from the town square, Carter added. They upgraded to 4K surveillance last month. We have angles that Holt doesn't even know exist. Marcus felt something shifting in his chest, the rage that had been simmering since his arrest, since his daughter's tears, since the smear campaign designed to destroy his reputation, suddenly had a direction. There's one more thing, Price said. This one came from an FBI contact. Derek Holt has been taking money. Recurring deposits from a known narcotics distributor named Marcus Webb. Protection payments. It's been going on for 6 years. Marcus looked at the admiral. Racketeering. Racketeering, federal charges, 10 to 20 years if convicted. The room fell silent. Outside, the Virginia night continued its slow rotation toward dawn. Somewhere in the city, a 12-year-old girl was sleeping fitfully, dreaming of police cars and handcuffs and a world that seemed designed to hurt her. Marcus thought about his mother, about working 3 jobs, about telling him he was going to be somebody. Let's end this, he said. The Oakbridge Community Gymnasium was transformed for the emergency town council meeting. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, filling the basketball court. A long table at the front held place cards for the mayor and council members. American flags flanked the stage. A podium stood ready for public comment. Derek Holt arrived early, dressed in the same ill-fitting suit he had worn for the news interview. His attorney Leonard Gilthorpe walked beside him, a leather briefcase in one hand and a confident smile on his face. Gilthorpe was known in legal circles as the Eel for his ability to slither out of tight spots. He had represented dirty cops before, had crafted narratives that turned aggressors into victims, had exploited technicalities and biases to secure outcomes that defied evidence. Remember what we discussed, Gilthorpe murmured as they took their seats at a table facing the council. Sympathy, vulnerability. You were scared for your life. You made a split-second decision. The big scary military man grabbed you and you thought you were going to die. Derek nodded, rehearsing the expressions he would need. The furrowed brow of concern, the slight tremor in his voice, the well-timed pause to collect himself before continuing. The gymnasium was filling up. Residents of Oakbridge, people who had read about the incident in the newspaper, curious onlookers who wanted to witness the drama firsthand. News cameras were being set up along the walls, their lights creating pools of harsh brightness. Derek scanned the crowd, looking for familiar faces. He saw some neighbors who had expressed support. He saw some colleagues from the department who had promised to testify on his behalf. He saw the local reporter Trey Lang who had run the sympathetic segment. What he didn't see was any sign of Marcus Cole or the Navy. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. There were no shows. The intimidation had worked. The smear campaign had been effective. The mighty Navy, for all its posturing, had decided that this particular battle wasn't worth fighting. "They're not coming," Derek whispered to Gilthorpe. The attorney glanced around the gymnasium and nodded. It appears they've calculated the political costs. Fighting a sympathetic local officer risking a public relations battle, they've decided to cut their losses. So we've won. We've won the first battle. Let's make sure we win the war. At 7 p.m. precisely, Mayor Patricia Hendricks called the meeting to order. She was a thin woman with silver hair and a perpetually worried expression. The kind of local politician who had risen to power by avoiding controversy rather than confronting it. "We're here to discuss the incident that occurred in Oakbridge Square." Mayor Hendricks began reading from a prepared statement. "Our goal is to hear from all parties and determine the appropriate path forward. I remind everyone that this is a public forum and we expect civil discourse." Gilthorpe stood immediately. "Madam Mayor, if I may, I'd like to address the council on behalf of Officer Holt." "You may proceed." Gilthorpe walked to the podium, his footsteps echoing in the hushed gymnasium. He gripped the sides of the lectern and looked out at the assembled crowd with an expression of profound sorrow. "What happened in Oakbridge Square was a tragedy," he began. "But not the tragedy you've been told. The narrative being pushed by outside forces, by the military establishment, by the media, is fundamentally false. Officer Derek Holt is not a villain. He is a victim." He paused for effect. Officer Holt was doing his job. He was responding to reports of a suspicious individual in our town square making residents uncomfortable. He approached in a professional manner. He asked for identification, and that's when things went wrong. Gilthorpe's voice dropped to a near whisper. The individual became aggressive, hostile. He refused to comply with basic requests. When Officer Holt attempted to detain him for everyone's safety, the individual grabbed him with enough force to nearly break his arm. Officer Holt believed in that moment that he was going to die. "Derek!" On cue wiped at his eyes. "Commander Cole is a trained killer," Gilthorpe continued. "That's not an insult. That's his job description. He has been trained by the United States government to end human lives." And when he grabbed Officer Holt, when he looked at him with those cold, dead eyes, Officer Holt saw his own death approaching. The crowd murmured. Some heads nodded. The fact that Commander Cole is being treated as a hero in this story is a miscarriage of justice. The fact that Officer Holt's career, his pension, his livelihood are being threatened because he tried to protect our community is an outrage. We are here to demand accountability, not for Officer Holt, but for the military establishment that thinks its personnel are above the law. Gilthorpe returned to his seat, looking satisfied. The room was quiet, contemplative. The narrative was taking hold. And then the gymnasium doors slammed open. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent gymnasium. Every head turned toward the back of the room. Every camera swiveled. Every breath stopped. Commander Marcus Cole walked through the double doors like he was walking into combat. He was not wearing the hoodie. He was not wearing civilian clothes. He was wearing his full navy dress blues. And the effect was stunning. The uniform was immaculate. Gold stripes on his sleeves caught the light. Ribbons covered his chest. A rainbow of valor that told a story of sacrifice most people in the room couldn't begin to comprehend. Silver stars, bronze stars, the Purple Heart, the Legion of Merit. Each decoration represented missions completed, enemies defeated, lives saved. He walked with the bearing of a man who had faced things far more terrifying than a gymnasium full of suburban residents. His footsteps were measured and deliberate. His expression was calm, focused, utterly controlled. Flanking him were two men who commanded their own forms of power. To Marcus's right walked Vice Admiral Raymond Price, 3 silver stars gleaming on his collar. The Admiral was older, grey-haired, but his posture radiated authority that transcended rank. He had commanded fleets, he had directed operations that changed the course of history, and he looked absolutely furious. To Marcus's left walked Benjamin Carter, the civil rights attorney, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed heavy with doom. Carter's reputation preceded him. He had taken on cases that made national headlines. He had forced cities and states and institutions to confront their failures, and he was smiling, which was never a good sign for the people he had come to oppose. Derek's confident smile faltered. He leaned toward Gilthorpe. "You said they weren't coming," he hissed. "Sit down!" Gilthorpe whispered back. "Let me handle this." But Derek could see the attorney's hands shaking slightly as he gripped his pen. Marcus stopped in the center aisle, 10 feet from the council table. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the vending machines in the hallway. You could hear the soft whir of the news cameras recording every moment. "Mr. Mayor," Benjamin Carter's voice boomed through the gymnasium, requiring no microphone to carry. "I am Benjamin Carter, retained counsel for Commander Cole. We apologize for our late arrival. The commander was conducting a classified operation overseas while Officer Holt was conducting a different kind of operation here in Oakbridge." He walked to the podium, displacing Gilthorpe without acknowledging his existence. "I've just listened to Mr. Gilthorpe's statement. Compelling performance, really quite moving. There's just one problem." Carter paused, letting the tension build. Every word of it was a lie. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Mayor Hendricks banged her gavel. "Order, we will have order." "Officer Holt claims he was responding to reports of a suspicious individual," Carter continued. "Those reports don't exist. We have the dispatch logs. No calls were received. No complaints were filed. Officer Holt invented the probable cause." "That's a lie!" Derek shouted, half rising from his seat. "Officer Holt claims Commander Cole became aggressive and hostile. The commander stood with his hands visible and asked if he was being detained. Officer Holt claims he nearly had his arm broken. Medical records show no injuries whatsoever." The video was edited. Derek was standing now, face red, spittle flying. "They're lying. They doctored the footage." Carter smiled. It was the smile of a predator that had cornered its prey. "Funny you should mention the video," he said. "Officer Holt deleted his body camera footage. He thought that would protect him. He forgot that these devices upload to cloud servers with 90-day retention policies. And he certainly forgot that the bank across the street recently upgraded to 4K surveillance." He signaled to a technician at the back of the room. A massive projection screen descended behind the council table. "Let's watch what actually happened, shall we?" The video began to play. It was high definition, crystal clear, captured from the bank's security camera at an angle that showed both Marcus and Derek perfectly. The gymnasium watched in silence as the encounter unfolded. They saw Derek approach Marcus on the bench, his posture aggressive, his hand resting near his weapon. They saw Marcus remain seated, hands visible, face calm. They saw Derek demand identification. They saw Marcus ask if he was being detained, and they saw Derek's face twist with rage at the question. "Note the body language," Carter narrated. "Commander Cole is seated, hands on his knees, making no threatening movements. Officer Holt is invading his personal space hand near his weapon, visibly agitated." The video continued. They saw Derek order Marcus to stand. They saw Marcus comply, rising slowly, keeping his hands visible. They saw Derek grab Marcus's shoulder, and they saw the look on Derek's face when Marcus asked him to reconsider. "Listen carefully," Carter said. "The audio has been enhanced." Derek's voice echoed through the gymnasium, clear as a bell. "Are you threatening me, boy?" The crowd gasped. The word hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Boy, used as a weapon, used as a slur. Several people in the audience stood up, faces twisted with anger. Mayor Hendricks was gripping her gavel so hard her knuckles were white. The video continued. They saw Derek draw his taser and point it at an unarmed man who was simply standing with his hands raised. They saw Derek holster the taser and draw his baton. They saw the swing, sloppy and telegraphed, aimed at Marcus's knee, and they saw Marcus simply not be there when the baton arrived. A subtle shift of weight, no counterattack, no aggression, just avoidance. "That," Carter said, "is what Officer Holt is calling assault. A man avoiding a baton strike that would have shattered his kneecap. And this is what happened next." They watched Derek lunge at Marcus. They watched Marcus catch his wrists and immobilize him without striking. They watched Marcus hold Derek helpless for several seconds before releasing him. No punches thrown, no kicks, no strikes of any kind. Commander Cole used the minimum force necessary to protect himself, and then he let go. That's not assault. That's restraint. Derek was sinking in his chair, his face the color of old ash. But Carter wasn't done. Now let's look at what happened after Officer Holt thought the cameras were off. The screen changed. This was new footage, clearly from Derek's own dash cam, time-stamped just minutes after the arrest. The gymnasium watched as Derek sat in his patrol car, hyperventilating, wiping sweat from his forehead. They watched him pull out his phone and dial a number. His voice filled the room. "Gary, it's Vance. I need a favor. I need you to pull a file on a guy named Marcus Cole. I want to know everything. Ex-wife's debts, parking tickets. I'm going to ruin this guy. I don't care if I have to lie. These black military guys always have issues. We'll paint him as a thug." Pandemonium. The gymnasium erupted. People were standing, shouting, pointing fingers at Derek. The betrayal was visceral. Many of these residents had defended Derek. They had believed his story. They had felt sympathy for him, and he had played them for fools. Derek sat frozen in his chair, unable to breathe. His chest felt like it was being crushed. He looked at Gilthorpe for help, but his attorney was already packing his briefcase, creating physical distance from his radioactive client. Marcus walked to the podium. He didn't need to raise his voice. The room fell silent out of pure respect. "My daughter cried herself to sleep 3 nights in a row," Marcus said. His deep voice rumbled through the gymnasium like distant thunder. "She asked me why the policemen hated us. She asked me if I was broken." He looked directly at Derek. "You didn't just fail your oath, Officer Holt. You attacked a child's peace of mind to cover up your own insecurity. You tried to destroy my reputation because you couldn't accept that you were wrong. And you used the power of your badge to inflict terror on someone you thought couldn't fight back." Marcus leaned in closer to the microphone. "I have fought men who would cut your head off on live television. I have hunted monsters in the dark. You're not a monster. You're just a bully with a badge. And bullies always fold when the lights come on." The room was still reeling from the video revelation when Chief Morrison stood up from the council table. His face was a mask of barely contained fury. He walked around the table, ignoring protocol, ignoring the mayor, walking directly toward Derek Holt. "Derek Holt," Chief Morrison said, his voice trembling with rage. "You are relieved of duty. You are fired. Effective immediately. Hand over your credentials, now!" Derek's mouth opened and closed. "Chief, please. It was a mistake. I was stressed. I didn't mean... Give me your credentials or I will have you escorted out of here in handcuffs." Derek reached into his jacket with shaking hands. He pulled out his police identification card, his retired badge. the symbols of the authority that had defined his existence for 14 years. He handed them to Chief Morrison. The chief looked at the credentials for a long moment. Then he dropped them on the floor. "You disgrace the uniform," Morrison said quietly. "You disgrace every officer who serves with honor. Get out of my sight." But Derek's nightmare was just beginning. Benjamin Carter stepped forward, holding a thick legal document. "Officer Holt, you are being served. This is a civil lawsuit for $50 million, filed on behalf of Commander Marcus Cole and his minor daughter, Amara Cole. The charges include defamation, malicious prosecution, deprivation of civil rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." Carter dropped the document on the table in front of Derek. "We will take your pension. We will take your house. We will take your car. We will take everything you own and everything you will ever earn. You will spend the rest of your life working to pay Commander Cole, and you will never, ever catch up." Derek put his head in his hands. The sob that escaped his throat was ugly and raw. But the universe wasn't done with him yet. From the back of the room, two men in dark blue windbreakers walked down the center aisle. They moved with a different kind of authority than the local police. On the back of their jackets in bold yellow letters were three letters that made Derek's blood run cold: FBI. They walked straight to the table where Derek sat collapsed. "Derek Holt," the lead agent asked. Derek looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "What, I'm being sued? I know, This isn't about the lawsuit." The agent pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "We've been monitoring your bank accounts as part of a civil rights inquiry initiated by Mr. Carter. We found some interesting recurring deposits from known narcotics distributors." The room went dead silent again. "Taking protection money is a federal crime, Derek. That's a RICO predicate. That's racketeering." "I don't. I never. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The agent spun Derek around and slammed him onto the table. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, loud as gunshots in the hushed gymnasium. "Derek Holt, you are under arrest for federal racketeering, corruption, and deprivation of rights under color of law." The arrest happened in full view of the cameras. Every news outlet in the region was recording. The footage would be broadcast on national networks within the hour. By morning, it would be everywhere, shared and reshared millions of times. Derek's legs gave out as the agents hauled him up. He had to be dragged, weeping and wailing, past the very residents he had claimed to protect, past the colleagues who had once called him friend, past the reporters who were already composing their leadees. As he passed Marcus Cole, Derek looked up with begging eyes. He was searching for something, mercy perhaps, or understanding, or some acknowledgement of their shared humanity. Marcus simply turned his back. "Get him out of here," one of the FBI agents said. The gymnasium doors closed behind the procession. For a long moment no one moved. The reality of what they had witnessed was still settling in. Then slowly the applause began. It started near the back, a single person clapping. Then more joined. Then more. Within seconds, the entire gymnasium was on its feet, applauding Commander Marcus Cole, applauding the truth, applauding the justice that so rarely came but had arrived tonight in spectacular fashion. Admiral Price leaned in toward Marcus as the ovation continued. "That went well. A bit theatrical for my taste, but effective." "He needed to be made an example of, sir," Marcus replied quietly. Benjamin Carter closed his briefcase with a satisfying snap. "He's going away for a long time. Federal prison isn't kind to dirty cops." Marcus looked at the empty doorway where Derek had been dragged out. The anger was gone. All that was left was exhaustion and the overwhelming need to go home. "I don't care where he goes," Marcus said, "as long as he stays away from my town and my daughter." He turned to the admiral. "Sir, permission to be dismissed. I have an ice cream date that is 3 weeks overdue." Price smiled. It was a rare expression for the old warrior. "Permission granted, Commander. Go be a dad." 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia was quiet. There were no protesters outside today, no news vans, no spectators hoping to witness history. The sensationalism had faded. The viral videos had been replaced by new outrages. The national attention had moved on. But the law hadn't moved on. The law had been grinding forward with relentless methodical precision. Derek Holt stood before the federal district judge, a shell of the man who had terrorized Oakbridge Square. He had lost 30 pounds in custody. His buzz cut had grown out into patchy graying hair. The cheap suit he wore hung off his frame like a shroud. He stood alone. His wife had filed for divorce 3 days after his arrest. She had taken everything she could carry and moved to Ohio. where she would try to rebuild a life untainted by his name. His son Nathan had refused to testify on his behalf, had refused even to visit him in the county jail. "You're not a cop, Dad," Nathan had written in a letter that arrived during Derek's second month of incarceration. "You're a bully, and I don't want to be anything like you. Don't contact me again." His former colleagues on the police force had testified against him. Every one of them. They had described years of racist remarks, excessive force, corruption. They had provided documentation they had been saving for exactly this moment. Insurance policies against a man they knew would eventually go too far. The police union had abandoned him. His attorney had withdrawn, citing irreconcilable differences. A public defender had been assigned to his case. A young woman who did her best but was overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence. The FBI had traced the protection money back 8 years. 17 deposits totaling $47,000 from Marcus Webb's drug operation. Derek had used the money for vacations, for a new truck, for the illusion of a life he couldn't actually afford. The civil rights charges had stuck as well. The video evidence was irrefutable. The pattern of misconduct was undeniable. 3 former victims had come forward to testify, describing encounters that matched Derek's treatment of Marcus Cole almost exactly. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Now came the sentencing. Judge Patricia Marlowe looked down at Derek from the bench. She was a stern woman in her 60s, appointed by 3 different presidents to various judicial positions. She had seen corruption in many forms, but the look in her eyes suggested that Derek Holt's case had offended her on a personal level. "Mr. Holt," she began, her voice filling the silent courtroom, "you were entrusted with a badge, a symbol of public safety, a contract with the community you served. Instead, you used that badge as a license to hunt." Derek tried to speak, to offer some final plea for mercy, but his voice cracked. "Your Honor, I just wanted to keep the town safe." "No." Judge Marlowe cut him off sharply. "You wanted to feel powerful, and in your pursuit of that power you engaged in racketeering, extortion, and the deprivation of civil rights. You targeted a decorated war hero because of his skin color, and when he didn't break, you tried to destroy his life with lies and criminal conspiracies." She paused, letting the words settle. "You are a disgrace to every officer who wears the uniform with honor." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. "I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. You will serve 85% of that time before being eligible for any form of supervised release. You are remanded to custody immediately." Derek's knees buckled. He would have collapsed if the marshals hadn't caught him. As they moved in to shackle him, he looked back at the gallery one last time. He was searching for someone to save him. A face from his past, a colleague, a friend, anyone. The pews were empty. He was dragged out the side door, sobbing, into a life of concrete walls and numbered jumpsuits. The bully was finally irrevocably broken. 2 weeks after the sentencing, the atmosphere in Oakbridge was unrecognizable. It was a crisp, perfect Saturday in October. The dogwoods had turned brilliant shades of red and gold. The air was clean and cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and fresh-cut grass. Commander Marcus Cole stood on the marble steps of the Oakbridge Conservatory of Music. He wasn't wearing a uniform today. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, looking less like a warrior and more like what he had always wanted to be, a father. Beside him stood Benjamin Carter, holding a giant ceremonial check. The amount written on it was staggering. $12 million. The entirety of the settlement Marcus had won from the city, the police department, and their insurance carriers. Every penny paid by the taxpayers who had allowed Derek Holt to operate for 14 years without accountability. A hush fell over the crowd. Hundreds of people had gathered for the announcement, residents of Oakbridge, families from surrounding communities, reporters and cameras, people who had been suspicious of Marcus when he first moved here, and people who now understood how wrong they had been. When this started, Marcus said into the microphone, his voice calm and steady, "I was told I didn't belong here. I was told that this square, this neighborhood, this conservatory were reserved for a certain kind of person." He looked down at Amara, who was standing beside him clutching her violin case. She was beaming with pride, the fear that had haunted her for months finally beginning to fade. "Money is a tool," Marcus continued. "It can be used to build walls, or it can be used to build bridges. I don't want this money. It was paid for by the taxpayers because the system failed, so I am giving it back to ensure the system never fails a child again." He gestured to a banner being unfurled above the conservatory doors, "The Cole Foundation for the Arts and Leadership." This endowment will cover full tuition instruments and travel costs for 50 students every year, students from underserved neighborhoods, students who have the talent but not the zip code. They will learn here, they will play here, and they will remind us that excellence comes in every color. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. It was release of tension that the town had been holding for 6 months. It was acknowledgement of pain survived and lessons learned, and justice finally served. Chief Morrison, who had managed to keep his job through a comprehensive departmental reform, stood at the back of the crowd. He caught Marcus's eye and nodded. It was a nod of respect, a promise that things would be different, that the department would be different. Marcus returned a single curt nod. Keep trying. After the cameras had packed up, after the crowd had dispersed to the reception, Marcus and Amara slipped away. They walked down the familiar sidewalk toward the town square. They walked past the boutiques and the cafes and the perfectly manicured lawns. They walked until they reached the wrought iron bench where everything had begun. Someone had tied a yellow ribbon to the armrest, a symbol of hope, a symbol of remembrance. Amara sat down on the bench, placing her violin case on her lap. She looked older than she had 6 months ago. The trauma had aged her in ways that Marcus wished he could undo. But she was healing. Slowly. Day by day. "Dad," she asked softly, looking up at him. "Do you hate him, Mr. Holt?" Marcus sat down beside her. He stretched his long legs out, crossing his ankles. He looked at the water fountain bubbling in the center of the square. He thought about the rage he had felt in that first moment. The primal urge to hurt the man who had threatened him, who had traumatized his daughter, who had tried to destroy everything they had built. Then he looked at the conservatory across the street. He saw a group of kids, black and white and Hispanic, running out of the doors, laughing, carrying instruments that the Cole Foundation would pay for. He saw joy where there had been fear. He saw possibility where there had been prejudice. "No," Marcus said, and he was surprised to find that he meant it. "I don't hate him, Amara. Hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's heavy, and I don't want to carry anything heavy anymore." He put his arm around her shoulders and squeezed. He lost everything because of who he was. We gained everything because of who we are. That's enough. Amara leaned her head against his shoulder. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces. The gentle sound of the fountain filled the silence. "I'm glad we stayed," she said quietly. "I like my violin teacher." Marcus smiled. It was the first real smile that had crossed his face in longer than he could remember. "I'm glad we stayed too." He checked his watch. The same battered G-Shock that had survived 3 deployments. The same watch he had been checking when Derek Holt first approached him on this very bench. "But I think we're forgetting something very important," Marcus said. "A mission objective that has been outstanding for 6 months." Amara looked up, grinning. "The ice cream." "The ice cream," Marcus confirmed. He stood and offered her his hand. "And not just any ice cream. I hear the shop around the corner has a triple chocolate fudge that is technically classified as a tactical asset." Amara laughed. It was the most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard. They walked away from the bench, hand in hand, leaving the past where it belonged, behind them. The sun was setting over Oakbridge, casting long golden shadows across a town that was a little bit kinder, a little bit fairer, a little bit safer. All because one man refused to bow when he was told to know his place. And that is the incredible true story of Commander Marcus Cole. It's a story that reminds us that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. That true power lies in composure, in integrity, in the absolute refusal to be bullied. Officer Derek Holt thought his badge made him a king, but he forgot that a badge is a burden of trust, and if you abuse it, it will crush you. 15 years in federal prison is a long time to think about a mistake. But for the children now attending that conservatory on full scholarships, Marcus Cole's legacy will last a lifetime. If the story moved you, if it reminded you that justice is still possible, even in an unjust world, do me a favor and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this don't just entertain us, they remind us who we are. They remind us what we're capable of. They remind us that good people standing their ground can change everything. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Stand your ground, and I'll see you in the next one.